storytelling, just as we're doing tonight, and we recognise all elders past, present and emerging and their continuing connection to the land. Avid Reader has been instrumental in keeping the literary community connected through this series of online Zoom interviews with authors and readers, and they've been absolutely determined to make a special effort to champion those books that have been released during this pandemic. The silver lining is that I know that we have with us tonight many people from all over the country that might not have been able to attend a physical launch. So wherever you are, please use social media to help keep authors, publishers and booksellers thriving. Take screenshots, publish on Facebook or tweet about tonight's event at avidreader4101. Tonight we'll be chatting to Anna Whateley about her debut novel, Peta Lyre's Rating Normal. But I'd first like to introduce Anna's editor, Kate Whitfield. Kate has worked in publishing for almost 2 decades and since 2014 has been an editor of children's and YA titles at Allen & Unwin. She's worked with many award-winning and best-selling authors, and she'd like to say a few words about our suspicion that Anna might be the next one.
Thanks, Cass. I'm really thrilled to be part of this celebration of Anna and her beautiful book. It's a real treat, actually, to, like you said, Cass, a silver lining to be able to join you from Melbourne. Anna and I have never actually met face-to-face. But although I'm sure we will one day when all of this is over. But yeah, it means a lot to me to be here for this tonight. But obviously you just have to forgive me if my children come in and ask for a sandwich or something. So working on Peta Lyre with Anna was one of the most rewarding experiences of my career, both on a professional and a personal level. When the publisher Jodie Webster told me we'd just acquired an Own Voices YA debut by a neurodivergent author, I was immediately interested. And as soon as I started reading the manuscript, I was hooked on Peta's amazing voice. And then there was Anna, who, as so many of you will know, is an absolute joy. One of the reasons I was so excited to work on Peta Lyre is that my son is neurodivergent. He and I have a great relationship full of affection and laughter and joy, but there's plenty of frustration too on both sides. And only weeks before this manuscript landed on my desk, I had said to my husband, I just wish I could experience what it's like inside his head. And then Peta Lyre came along and blew my mind. I'd read books about autism and ADHD, but not until I read Peta Lyre did I feel like I understood something of what it's like to be neurodivergent, and that is profound, not just as a parent, but also as a reader. I'm neurotypical, so Anna and I had a brilliant yin and yang relationship as we worked on the edit together. There was lots of, oh, you read it that way? I never would have thought of it that way. I thought of it like this. And that's on both sides. Anna put the truth on the page, and she was so open and generous about it that it feels like a privilege to hear Peta's thoughts and feel what she feels. You'll probably notice that both Anna and I talk about Peta like she's a real person, and I don't think that's an accident. I genuinely love most of the books I work on, but it's rare to work on one that changes me, and Peta Lyre's Rating Normal has done that. I want to put it into the hands of everyone I know, and it's not just that it's deepened my understanding of my own son and of the experience of being neurodivergent. It's not just a great Own Voices book. It's great YA. It has that urgency that you feel as a teenager. You're right there in the moment with Peta, experiencing that excitement and that anxiety and everything else, often all at once. In a way, it's horrible because it's so real, and who wants to go through that again? But it's also beautiful and joyful, and it captures the wonder and intensity of being 16 that can never quite be replicated once you're an adult, unless, of course, you're Anna Whateley and you have the ability to put it perfectly into words. So I just wanted to say thank you, Anna, for asking me to speak tonight, and for the privilege of working on your book, and for the trust you put in me as your editor, and wish you the very best as you continue your journey with this book out into the world. I hope it makes it into the hands of many, many readers, and that they all love it just as much as I do. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kate. I think that's one of the most beautiful personal endorsements by an editor, and we've already made Anna cry, so we're off to a good start.
Yeah.
Just give her a second to compose herself. And thanks, Kate. That was a really beautiful insight. Thank you. While Anna's just composing herself, I'll talk a little bit about Anna, and I'm holding up, of course, the book, the beautiful cover of this book. So Dr. Anna Whateley has a PhD in young adult fiction and has always worked in literature and education. She is proudly an Own Voices author. Much like her protagonist, Peta Lyre, she has all the letters of the alphabet, which we'll talk about soon. Peta Lyre's Rating Normal is a tender, poignant and moving coming-of-age story with themes of neurodiversity, difference, friendship and young love. It's an Own Voices story that embraces compassion, understanding and empathy, and I'm thrilled to be in conversation with Anna tonight about this amazing book. Welcome, Anna.
I don't know if I should talk.
You should talk. Now's your turn.
Oh. What are the rules here, Cass?
Oh, there's no rules. I'm going to ask you a question and you answer. It's very simple.
All right, I got that. I can do that.
You're contained now? You're all together?
I think so. I never know when that will happen. I'm not an emotional person, if you can believe it. Thank you so much. And thank you, Kate. Thank you, Cass. And thank you, Jodie, who's very quietly there.
That was a beautiful introduction by Kate. Anna, let's start this conversation because I have so many questions. So your character, Peter, is ASD, ADHD, SPD, LGBTQI. Can you tell us what these letters mean, how they resonate with you personally, and what it means to be an Own Voices author?
Okay. Well, the letters mean, so ASD is autism spectrum disorder, although we'd rather drop the disorder part, and ADHD being attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Again, we'll just drop the D when we can, and sensory processing disorder, which probably is a disorder, although, you know, in some ways I think it's kept the human race alive that we can be so sensitive. And what was the other one? LGBTQI plus means a lot of things. Queer, I tend to just go with queer because it's the easiest version of that. And was that all of them?
I think so.
Yeah. And Own Voices, see, this is different. Sometimes I answer this in terms of what it means to me to write from own voice as someone who shares those diagnoses, which I believe is really important.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah, so I think partly I wonder if you could write this if you didn't have those shared diagnoses, because while I thought in a way it was an experience a lot of people went through, it's been a real revelation when people say to me who are neurotypical saying that they don't go through this every day. So I'm like, you don't think that way? What do you mean? And so after writing it, I've realized that actually, yeah, okay, that's quite different. I think not just an extreme version of something, but it's actually quite different. But also the Own Voices allows you to find a community of other writers and a community of readers. So there's and a way for publishers to understand what you're offering and who you are and why what you're offering might be different, because you're speaking with that sense of authority over your material. So I didn't need to research what it was like to have something by looking at other cultural representations of it, which is inherently faulty when you think about it. So I didn't have to do that side of the process of writing a character like Peter.
And why do you think representation is important in literature, particularly in stories for children and young people?
I think a lot of people like myself didn't expect to ever see themselves represented in something. And I was just talking yesterday to my friend Jess about the process of bracing yourself. So when you read something or you watch a television show, and for example, a girl kisses another girl, or someone acts slightly, I guess, with autistic traits, you brace yourself waiting for that to either be cured or be denied or be erased in some way. And that's what you expect will happen, because that's what always did happen. And then now we're seeing these own voices books, or even not own voices books, other writing that's with a respect to the movement, that have then had a sensitivity reader or an authenticity reader. And so then the experiences are there and they have a genuine feel to them. And all of a sudden you feel recognised and you feel seen, and you don't feel quite as different as you felt an hour before that. And that's really powerful, because you feel part of a community, and a sense of belonging is so crucial to mental health. And that's really important to me.
And that's, I think, what we keep hearing about this book is I felt seen. Either I felt seen or I felt like I could understand what it was like to be.
That's kind of weird, because when they say they felt seen, I'm sorry if I fidget, I do have a quite bad back. When people say they feel seen, for me, that makes me a little bit nervous. It's like someone's watching. So I feel like saying sorry. Like, I'm sorry, I wasn't like...
No, you don't have to apologise.
It's a scene thing. I'm like,
it's a compliment.
I'm getting used to it.
Let's talk about the book. So tell us a little bit about 16-year-old Peta and her circumstances when the novel opens. We're not going to give any spoilers away, obviously, but tell us about when the story starts.
We start with Peta, and we start exactly where I started with her. So I had an idea of a mental process I was going to write. Excuse me for a second. But then, so I started her in my cafeteria, because I went to a TAFE college in southern Brisbane area of the Redlands there, doing year 11. And I sat her on a concrete wall, and I've made her from a really strange family situation. And she's sitting there with her best mate, Jeb, and I just basically sat her there and thought, right, they've had lunch and now they need to go to class, and what will happen? And that's what I did, and that's exactly what I wrote. And then you start with the sense of an Australian feel to it. To me, there's a real Brisbane feel, and I don't know if other people can. Like, I can smell the gum trees when I'm writing those scenes, and I can imagine the way the air feels. And then she's mucking around with her friend in the way that they do. And then she heads off to class, and obviously you get a lot of sensory input all the time. I've diverged already from your question, Cass.
No, you haven't. No, that's good. I'm just wanting to give the audience a bit of a sense about what the story is about.
Well, so she's basically going through a normal day at college, but for Peta, it's not going to be quite the same. So she's out of college, so there are no bells. It's at a TAFE. And when she goes home, she's going home to her auntie because her parents quit. Oh, hello, Chrissy.
What happened there? Oh, Chrissy.
We're just cats. Sorry about this.
The cat has is it like
That's
a photo
our
bomb?
first interruption of the night. Good, over and out.
So she lives with her auntie and her auntie's baby toddler. So that's where she lives, and it's an unusual situation, but it's quite typical when I was growing up, and I believe still, to be not living in a traditional family.
So Peta often feels frustrated while she's trying to navigate the world around her, but because she follows the social rules that she's had sort of indoctrinated into her forever, she passes as normal. But nevertheless, we're given this running commentary on what's going on underneath the surface. So I feel like she's a duck gliding about on the water, but underneath she's sort of paddling furiously to keep up. How difficult is it for neurodivergent people to manage that process?
It is not just difficult, it's dangerous. And I think this is what we've all realised as the whole world sort of becomes more aware of neurodiversity, the damage that's done in that passing. And a lot of people who might have come in tonight or whatever, they know me and know me as just Anna, and they don't see that mad paddling underneath, or they don't realize the fear that you're going to go into as you enter a very normal social situation, and the work you've done your whole life to create what people see. And I think it's we call it masking. So when you manage to present as typical to those around you, and the masking behaviour is something that the whole of the autistic community, and in a lot of ways the ADHD community, who are kind of sidelined in this debate, in this discussion, but they also have a process of masking. So of pretending, like I've always pretended not to be a fidgeter, and yet you can't see the ringing of my hands, which is amazing. This is great for Zoom. I can hold them under the screen, and my feet, and the fact that I've got all these fidget things under the desk for my toes, just so that I can sit here and face the screen and not just disappear, because if my body can't fidget, my mind will wander. So, which it just did. But yeah, so I think that is exhausting, and I think that it's really important, especially for if you're interacting with a neurodivergent person and you think, oh, but they seem so normal, or they might not be very autistic, or they're probably just a little bit ADHD. That means they have worked so damn hard for you to be comfortable. And it means they've worked so hard for you not to worry about them, or for you not to go away going, oh, they're a bit strange. And that effort they took on board because they probably like you, or they're scared of you, or that's what they felt they needed to do. And not having to do that is...
Yeah, that's such a great piece of reframing about how to look at difference. That's great. And you sort of segged into my next question, which was about masking and what it is, and you've explained that really well. I wonder, do you think that we all mask to a certain extent, even neurotypical people? Is that something that we...
Yeah, and I think, well, you can take any of the characteristics that fall into these diagnoses, which are just collections of characteristics in some way. But the whole idea of a diagnosis is that if you have this many of these criteria, then it is likely that your brain actually works differently, which they've done with probably slightly dodgy brain mapping, and I don't know. But the point is, we know as a community that we tend to all have certain similarities. And while other people take on, just say, for example, you go to see your new boyfriend or girlfriend's parents, and you are as good as you can be, and you kind of behave nicely and you don't swear. Well, I guess in some ways that's masking, but it's not the same as every day, day in, day out, in nearly every interaction, pretending to be something that doesn't feel as natural to you as it does to someone who's neurotypical.
Yeah, that does sound exhausting. And as you said, if people are passing as normal, they're obviously doing a lot of work behind the scenes to make that happen. Yeah. Look, I'd love for you to read a little passage from the book. Would you like to do that for us? And then we'll have a talk about it.
So I wrote this passage, and it is based on advice from multiple psychologists for myself and my children, where you allocate worry time. So instead of worrying about something all the time, you assign certain amounts of time that you're allowed to worry about that. And so Peta's done this. She's worried about going to a dance, and she decided earlier in the day that she would worry at 6:30, and she put it out of her mind until then. And so this is the worry time. Okay. My room is the safest place my body has. My mind doesn't really have a safe place. 6:30 p.m, worry time. Part of me likes this strategy, the ASD part, but ADHD screams against such order and forced focus. My alphabet hates itself. Like, imagine someone says, think outside the box. My hyperactive mind creates a sphere and laughs at the box and researches for hours on end how much better spheres are. Then my autism freaks out that I broke the rules without realising there were any, and wonders why we're supposed to think inside cardboard boxes in the first place. Surely being inside cardboard boxes isn't comfortable. 6:50 p.m. I've wasted 20 minutes of my worry time thinking about shapes and drawing circles and cubes on the wall inside my wardrobe. They surround my favourite book quotes, blue-tacked scrawlings curled at the edges. Do I go to the dance? Think of the best and the worst that could happen. The worst, I go and die of humiliation. The best, I don't go and don't suffer any humiliation. I'm pretty sure that's not how this exercise is supposed to play out. Try to see your fears as things you can hold and laugh at them. Oh, great, my fear of humiliation just humiliated me. 7 p.m. I'm not allowed to worry anymore. My insides sink, knowing I'll either give some unconvincing excuse and ditch, or go and speak all my thoughts aloud while lap dancing on a police officer, or go and sit in the corner with my hands over my ears, wishing I'd stayed home. I climb onto the window ledge and take off into the night air. The bats welcome me and we fly to their caves. I live out the rest of my days in the dark and the smell of rancid shit, happy and safe, furled in my wings. I revise for my English exam and go to bed early. Normal rating, 3 out of 10. Inhale, exhale, survive.
Thank you so much. That's a beautiful passage. I love that passage. And I think, as you said, that idea that she allocates herself 30 minutes of worry time, which is then broken down into segments, I think that gives us a really a good glimpse into how very hard it is to be inside her headspace all the time.
Yeah, and it never quite works because you waste the time every time. So, yeah.
So let's talk about a couple of things that are included in that reading. Firstly, the rating system that Peta uses. Could you tell us a little bit about that, why she uses it and why you used it to help tell her story?
It's an interesting one because I did it without thinking very hard. I was just, I think, writing. I wrote very quickly, and I just needed to express something without going into it all the time. And it's not something I would do personally, actually give a number out of 10. And yet every time you walk away from a situation, you'll think, oh, didn't pass very well on that one. Or, yeah, I've come away, I've done it, I've won, you know, and after this event tonight, how much did I manage to quite pass, you know? And I needed a shorthand for that. And I needed something people understood. And I know a lot of other things are much easier if you rate them out of 10, like pain. And, you know, you go to the hospital, it's always rate your pain out of 10. And all of a sudden, something that's so huge and difficult becomes much easier. And so if you can put your normality on that scale, which really throws the spotlight on it a little bit in that way, and it shows her understanding of what that is. And she's generally probably quite accurate, unfortunately, because we're not lacking in, I say we, I shouldn't speak for a whole community. I can tell when I haven't passed and someone's uncomfortable, or I know, and I did draw on my wardrobe walls, or and I did stick quotes on the walls, and Kate was so good at trying to describe what I meant with the little scraps of paper because it didn't make much sense at first. And, you know, you write the favourite bits of words because you love them so much and you put them on the walls, but you do know that lots of other teenagers might not do that. So you are aware. But yeah, the rating was a shorthand, and the inhale, exhale, survive is the basic part of life for me. So basically you keep breathing and you survive, and survive means accepting death is part of life and that you keep going.
It's really effective device, I guess, throughout the book. It sort of keeps us in tune with Peta's feelings, how she's feeling about herself and about how she's going with the world. The other thing I wanted to ask you about that reading, the part you read about Peta flying off the window ledge and living with the bats, is similar to a lot of sections throughout the book that are italicized and that are obviously Peta's thoughts. So they're either her hopes about what she wishes might happen, or they're her fears about the terrible things that could go wrong, or otherwise they're the mantras that her therapist has instilled into her about how to appear normal. Why was it important for you to give the reader this very intimate view inside Peta's head?
That's how I think, and it's not, I guess it's, firstly, it's not just the therapist. There's often rules that you make that you've gotten from teachers or that you've gotten from someone who frowned on you for doing a certain thing. it can be you read it on a sign. Everyone gets rules this way from society. It's how we socialize as human beings. It's just when it's really overt, and especially from a therapist or a book of social rules, it's overt, it's actually written on the page. So it's all of those things forming the rules, and that's not her voice necessarily. It's important to distinguish that. And for the other parts where she's imagining what might happen and everything, she is also gifted. And I think the tendency to have your imagination run free and to just imagine, especially an escape. It's often an escape thought, because you just think, and I was a runner, like as a kid, you name it, I'd be out that window. Sorry, Mum. Oh gosh, I don't know if she logged in. You'd be out that window. You would be, down the park. Actually, she knew about all those. And you just needed to get away because it's all too hard. And so you just want to do that. And sometimes you can't. And so for Peta, because she's a good kid, she's much better behaved than I was. She's much more contained in her acting on those impulses. But they have to go somewhere. And that racing mind, the amount of thoughts you can fit into a second, you've got to put all them in. So she imagines them and they soothe her, I think, in some ways, even though she can't act on them. And working on that throughout the book towards the end, and working on the ratings and those sorts of things, and reconciling them with herself is a really important part of the book.
I think it gives us a really clever insight into how she thinks and how she just is, how she goes about her day, and that constant analysing makes her behaviour that otherwise might seem odd, it kind of makes it seem reasonable because we see it from her perspective, and it's entirely kind of okay when we look at it that way. Let's talk about the ski trip. So the school ski trip is both confronting and also comforting for Peta. Why is it both ends of the spectrum for her?
I love the snow. I love the snow so much. And
yet you live in Brisbane.
I know. And I went on a school ski trip. So plot-wise, that was the simplest thing for me to do. But also, as with every holiday and every trip, there's going to be high points and low points. And so it was a great way to take her out of her environment and basically test everything that she was and that she believed. And the way she was, I suppose. So the snow is such a sensory experience, and sensory things being such a big part of the novel. And one of the best things about the snow, I don't even know if this is completely relevant, is the quiet and the silence. And you don't get that, especially in a subtropical environment that we're in, where even a bird, it comes up to your waist and it's 500 decibels, but you go to the snow and it's just this silent softness. But then snow is not just one thing, it's like 5 million different textures, and it's just amazing. And so for her to be in that is just such a passionate experience, the relationship with the snow. But also there are people there, which just keeps happening whenever you go to the snow. There's always other people. Apart from some places in Finland, I have to say that was quite nice. But so, yeah, obviously she has some fraught experiences on her ski trip.
That's quite scary and confronting for her because it's something new. She hasn't skied before.
Yeah, and some of the events, were based on real events, and that people probably wouldn't imagine would happen. And taking advantage of people who are neurodivergent is a massive problem in our society. And the Me Too movement for the disability community is a very specific topic and a specific thing that we probably won't go into without having, a huge discussion. But I thought it was really important to point out that while people see Peta as vulnerable, that vulnerability isn't just nice and cute or lovely or what a sweet part of her personality or how trusting or any of that sort of thing. It's actually dangerous, and it's not something we want to foster. And that rule following, very much so, can get you into personal danger. And so there's a really, really strong imperative to fight that in our community, I believe.
So it's, I guess the ski trip for me, it was scary and confronting for her on one hand, but on the other hand, it was a real opportunity for her to increase her own self-confidence, because she found that she, you know, there were things she was capable of that she...
Oh, and she's great at skiing. She had to be, because I like skiing. And I was good at it when I was 15. I wasn't good at much, I can tell you. But skiing I did. And of course she has love and she has romance. Shouldn't forget that. So that's always, it's a lovely
important.
thing. Yeah.
So you mentioned the rules, breaking the rules there. Do you think that it's necessary for people to know the rules in order to make their own decisions about breaking them?
Okay, hang on.
You can pass.
Oh, well, if you're talking about writing, then probably.
I guess I'm talking more about Peta's situation and you know, all of the rules that people tell her she needs to follow to appear or to pass as normal. And ultimately she decides to break some of those rules herself. But do you think that she needed to know them in the first place?
I think she just probably got given the wrong rules. So I think if we changed the rules to be more thoughtful, we wouldn't end up in the same place. So if the rule wasn't that you should do what people in charge tell you to do all the time, then if the rule was more, you must assess a situation and decide whether that person is trustworthy before you decide to, you know, it's not something you can dictate in that way. But if you have given someone the authority over their life for the years before and this happens, then they will have a bit, people say trust your gut. And that's often the general rule we're supposed to all follow. That is so hard when you've been gaslit your whole life, when you've been told your gut instincts are wrong. So if your gut instinct is you're happy, you should flap your hands, or if you're scared of something, you'll cover your ears. If that's your instinct and everyone has told you don't do that, then you're taught from such a young age to deny all of your instincts. And I think if that is curbed, and it's a complicated thing. It's not simple, but if that is curbed and phrased in a certain way, then when it comes to the bigger questions over the rules, you know, your teacher told you to whack Bobby on the head, you're going to have years of someone explaining how to trust yourself and your instincts to then know to say no to that, even though they're an authority. But you can't just make another rule to say don't always do what someone tells you. That's too vague. You've got to have that. You've got to give people a sense of agency before you throw them into those big problems and wonder why they didn't get it right.
That's such a great explanation. You really nailed that. I feel like that was a really good
I've never thought about it quite. Yeah, there you go. No.
That was great.
It's a hard thing to explain. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was a really good answer. Thank you. Okay, here's another big question for you. How have these three things, so motherhood, your writing, and your own diagnoses, intersected, and are they now so intricately entwined that you can't imagine one without the others?
Okay, so in terms of their relationship, I was diagnosed as ADHD, and when I was late 30s, so a few years ago, and wrote Peta Lyre on the understanding that I had an ADHD character with sensory processing disorder, and that was my own voice. And I have children on the spectrum, so I'd learned a lot about that and what that meant. And I knew I was factoring it in subconsciously, and I was concerned about that because I didn't feel like it was my voice. I was writing ADHD to me. But by the time I finished the novel and I read it back and I thought, far out, that's a lot. That's a lot just for ADHD. And so in the process of once I'd submitted it, I did actually go and receive my own diagnosis, for which, you know, Peta is entirely responsible. So thanks, Pete. It's great because I had an understanding finally, and it locked together a whole bunch of stuff that didn't make a lot of sense. So all of a sudden I had this new understanding, and I had an ability to say to my children, now it's we. It's not you and them and us. It's we are this, or we often do this, or we have this little sense of community at home. But with the relationship between the parenting and the writing for me is actually just a completely separate thing. I actually find it quite, so at home in lockdown, it's very rare that I'd write unless everyone managed to go away, leave home, because I can't be a mum and a young adult at the same time. It doesn't end well anyway, because you end up making some pretty dodgy parenting decisions. Because, go and eat chocolate, I'm busy. So I have to really separate that, because when I'm writing, I'm tapping into that young adult Anna and what it felt like when I was 16. And she's not someone who parents 3 children. So to me, they're very separate.
Great, thank you. Just on that same theme, what do you think is the state of neurodiverse content at the moment in terms of literature, films, plays and music? Where do you think we are with it?
I think we're at the beginning. I think we've probably finished with the let's base a character on an archetype, not really saying what that is or having any real understanding. So, as far back as, well, I mean, there's Sherlock Holmes, and you can go even further back. There are a lot of neurodivergent characters that we can couch diagnose, where you can just diagnose from where you are and imagine who that person was. I think we might be getting to the point where we're a little tired of that. And I'm a little tired of, I really like Saga from the Bridge. It's a Nordic noir series. And she's very clearly based on an ASD set of characteristics and personality traits and things. They do talk about it in interviews, and this one gets me. So they don't mention things on a show. They refuse to use the labels and the terminology, and yet they'll talk about it in interviews. And I really loved the show until I heard in an interview the actress saying, it was, I did loads of research, and it was really amazing to step into that for a while and experience what it's like to be autistic for the months that I filmed this show. And I thought, careful, you've just got to be really careful there, because no matter how much you do, you aren't. So there's a little bit of a danger there. There are a lot of male characters. There are a lot of lots of boys who are autistic in film, media, books. That's the most. When I say a lot, that's not many. Sorry. Most of what you see will be a boy, because the diagnosis being primarily of boys, because the criteria and social expectations are skewed. And I think there aren't many ADHD. They're funny. Let's put ADHD character. Let's put Jake in. Oh my God, it's gone out of my head. Anyway, Peralta. So let's put characters in who have ADHD, because they're really funny. We won't show the other side of that. We won't show the depression and the collapsed life and the inability to do things as a serious concern for them. And they would have anxiety and depression by that age, because you don't get to be an adult with ADHD with no help without having some problems. So yeah, ADHD is there for the funny. We just need to have a more realistic representation. We need some women, we need some girls, and we need some own voices content. I'm working on it.
Next book. That leads really nicely into my next question, actually. I thought we'd get back to Peter here. So the book really includes some beautiful friendships, which I loved, and some tender moments of young love blossoming, but also some really hilarious incidents that occur because of that disconnect between how Peter sees the world and how the world is. And my question is, did you have more fun writing, or did you enjoy more writing the funny sections or the poignant passages?
Oh, poignant. I'm like a pain addict. I don't know what's wrong with me. It's like the reason I write it is normally because I have this memory of an emotion, and then I have to create a whole event to get to that emotion. And it might be a good one, because pain and pleasure are pretty much the same thing in a lot of ways. So I've got to get to that moment. So I have to write like this whole thing to make sure that she'll have a moment where she feels that. So it might be when her medications run out and everything's completely wrong, and there's this moment of despondency and despair, and I just need to find a way to get that out in words on a page. I don't know if it's like an expulsion of some sort. And so that really pushes me to create everything that goes around it. And the fun bits are because I don't really know what else to write. I never kind of sat around with my friends and went, oh, life, or, you know, we were teenagers and we didn't kind of muse about philosophical, I mean, occasionally, maybe, but when we were just together, it was just, there was a lot of that just mucking around. So that's kind of what happened in those bits, but they're probably, the smoothness in which you read them would be largely probably to do with Kate, because I am not good at some of the navigating of those bits. I'm much better at the world is ending and we're all, well.
Oh, well, thanks to Kate for that. That's good. Listen, Anna, you spoke in another interview recently about the relationship of time to a person with ADHD. That time is all about the now rather than the past or the future. And I found that really interesting because I hadn't really thought about that before. I wondered if you wanted to elaborate on that a little bit.
It's a problem. So there is actually a documented and very serious issue with not having a good concept of how far something might be in the future, or how far away something was in the past. I don't very easily remember when I graduated high school. I actually would have to start with the year I was born and then start adding up to how old I think I was when I graduated. Or mostly I ask someone because everyone else remembers stuff like that. I have my friend Sherry who has one of those timelines in her head and can slot everything in. And so I can ask her when I graduated my PhD, but I wouldn't have a clue unless it's like written somewhere. And it's not because I don't care about it. It's because I just don't allot time in the same way. And that can come down to the point of if someone says, oh, we should meet up for coffee next week, my brain just goes into meltdown of, I don't know what I'm doing next week. How far away is that? And even if I have an empty diary, I'll be like, but I don't know what's going to come in on that. And what if I book something and then I have to change it? And then who do I change? Does that mean someone's more important than someone else? They're going to think I don't care about them because I didn't book it. By this time, a month's gone past and there's no coffee and everyone thinks you don't like them, but you really do. You just can't quite get it in there. So, yeah.
That's exactly the thought processes that are going on in this book, all the way through this book. Exactly that.
I feel like I should apologise. But this is...
No, it's great. It's great.
But right now, you know, we've got things we've not quite done, Cass, where I'm like, yeah, we need to do that. And I'm like, but I don't know when I'll do that and how will I do... What if I'm homeschooling? I don't know if I'm homeschooling or what's going on. So it's difficult. And for Peta, she very much lives in the present. So she's had this past that we only really learn about through a few flashbacks because she doesn't talk about it. She doesn't really think about it very much. And that was very much how I lived. I never really considered those things. And if someone says, do you have a 5-year plan? Was this in a 10-year plan of yours? I'm like, well, I booked something in 3 weeks and if I don't do this, it'll be overdue. So that's my plan. Make sure it's handed in. Yeah, so I'm very much, so Peta by accident is very the same. Yeah, but it's a good, I mean, people say that for mindfulness, that's great. They don't realise that it can just actually be a little bit shit to live in the moment.
Yeah, yeah. In another interview I heard you speak, you said that medication saved you.
Yeah.
And when I hear people say, you know, oh, I'm on such and such a medication, but I don't want to be on it forever, I always think, why not? Like, why wouldn't you want to take the drugs that help you feel better, happier, and more well? So why do you think it is that medication for mental illness is so much more disparaged than meds for physical illness? And how do we get rid of that stigma?
Oh, both though. Both are disparaged. I take both. They both are. No one thinks you really should probably have to take a medication or you're weak. And we absorb that discourse so deeply and that those thought patterns that we think we're weak if we do them. So it's like accepting that you're not just faulty for a bit, you're faulty perhaps forever. And instead of stopping and thinking, well, hang on, what do you mean by faulty? We don't get that far. We just think, oh, we should probably make sure we add in there, I won't take them for long because this is just an illness that I'll recover from, rather than me being permanently disabled, because that sounds like a dirty word. And so I can say that as a proudly disabled person, that instead of saying, I take this, medication so I can get through the day, and you need to see that the same way you see insulin. Because at the end of the day, there are many times where I would not have made it through that day without the medication. And that goes from Ritalin to antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication or my heart medication. They're all essential, and we aren't taking them for an easy way out. And we're taking them because it gets us to a level playing field, hopefully, not normally completely, to a level playing field with everyone else to just get through life.
Which is why it's so important, I guess, to normalise that and just make it okay and be tolerant and accepting of.
And also that it's not all rosy. So yes, I need my Ritalin, and it is essential to me to be getting through. It's not easy. There are downsides, and I think I wanted to make sure that writing Peta, there was an expression of the ups and downs of that, and that it's not an easy thing to just take a tablet and everything's fine.
Yeah, she's quite conscious throughout the book, isn't she, of her doses and when they're due and whether she's had too much or not enough.
It's a lot to keep track of. Yeah, it's a lot to maintain 3 doses a day of a medication when you have trouble keeping track of time.
Yeah, as per our previous question. I've got a couple more questions that I want to quickly get in here, and then I think we're going to go to the audience for some questions. I wanted to say that reading Peta Lyre is really eye-opening for a lot of us, because it shows us just how differently some other people think. And I imagine that for neurodiverse readers, it's incredibly satisfying to read something that could come from inside your own head. But how interesting was it for you as an author to realise that other people don't always think the way that you and Peta think, or that people might focus on completely different things?
Most of this I went through with Kate, because she was my closest companion for the novel, and we did have a lot of back and forth. The side of the edits was hilarious. There was this huge discussion about spaghettification and whether or not you'd be alive to see yourself go stringy before you died if you did this. And it was so partly Kate's probably thinking, why? And I'm thinking, but it's got to be there and it's got to be right. And so we had those sorts of discussions because the detail was so important to me, and she was very respectful of that. But even things like describing cheese, the flavour, or whether it was, sharp, or whether it's all these sensory things, trying to explain what it's like to eat meat. Oh my goodness. So I was trying to explain how you can feel the vessels popping. So I didn't eat meat till I was about 21. I had my first steak, which I then promptly vomited. And because I can feel the vessels popping in my mouth. So I'm trying to explain this, and I'm writing this, and Kate's going, well, I don't know. I wrote it in some ways that didn't make sense. So I'm trying to explain a sensory experience that's so deep to me, thinking, how can you not notice that? Why do you not feel that whenever you eat this thing, or whenever you put the wrong thing in your mouth, or what if you've walked around without your socks on and you stood on all the bits, and then you put the bits on the couch, and Kate's like, okay. Very respectfully trying to make sure that the words I had written had the same meaning for a reader. So they had to make sense in the same way for someone who had sensory processing disorder as someone who's neurotypical, because it's got to go for every reader. In that way, we wanted to make sure it communicated properly. That was very much a discussion, and it was mostly funny. But the bit where I've realised readers on the whole who are messaging me now, who have very much like, oh wow, it must be hard to think like that. And it's this process of people othering you so blatantly. So they're not just So it's basically going, oh, you are different, and other. Yeah, I don't know, othering is a word we're supposed to just throw around. But it's a process of watching that happen. Some people saying, this is us and we are now we. And some people saying, oh, you're them and they, and you are not anything like me. And we've now cemented that difference, which is just weird. It's just weird. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that's strange.
But I think this book goes some way to bridging that gap.
And I think it's looking for the similarities to understand by is probably the best way forward for those neurotypical people.
Yeah. And it's such a wonderful book. It's such a wonderful sort of insight into how adolescents generally feel, even neurotypical teens who, for whatever reason, are feeling disconnected or isolated. So, I guess what you're saying is that it's all about what the characters have in common more than their differences.
Yeah, and anyone who has had an anxious thought will most likely have, a feeling of understanding of what's going on there. And a lot of people go through anxiety sometimes for a short period of time, sometimes forever. And to have that written out and to then be accepted as something that can still exist whilst having a very meaningful life full of love is important.
And Peta's memory, her personal memory list sort of gets longer and longer, doesn't it, as the book goes on, as she adds to it the things that people do that are strange or strange to her. Her head, I think you say it swims with mixed up messages and unsteady boundaries, and she has real trouble gauging the reactions of others and interpreting their meaning and intent. And I think that you really explore that in a way that's very, very insightful for the rest of us to understand how a mind works like that. And I think for people whose mind does work like that, it just must be such a relief to read something and, there's that horrible word again, but feel seen, feel like, that's me on the page.
Yeah. I think a lot of people know what it's like when the cool kid at school goes in with a canvas bag and it's great and it becomes a new trend. But if you'd gone in with the canvas bag, you'd have been the geek and everyone would have teased you.
Very good analogy.
Why is that okay for them? How come they can do it? And there's this
analogy.
And if you have that every day, like, well, how come they could do that? How come they can say that word and it's fine, but if I do it, it's wrong? And the inconsistency.
Yeah.
Maddening.
Yeah. Well, I have got loads more questions, but I think that we might go to Chrissy for some audience questions, and then
we do.
I'll always, if they're boring, I'll step in and ask my own.
We do have a few questions here from the audience. I'm putting the link to the book again up on your screen as well. So if you want to purchase this book, that's where to go. Now we have a question here from, I'll just go right back to the beginning, from Joe, who wants to know, did the character of Peta develop over time, or did she pop into your head fully formed?
She arrived very, very quickly because I had a deadline and I'd tried to write something and it was very deep and dark and very depressing, and it ended in 10,000 words and that was it, and that's where it's stayed since then. And then I realised I needed more than that, and I went to an Avid talk by Claire Keegan, who writes short stories, and she's amazing, Irish lady with long red hair, Joe. So this is one of the tribe, and she just was saying very clearly that if you're missing something, it's the pain. And I really shouldn't keep talking about this. Everyone's going to think I'm really a bit of a pain addict, but that you've missed it, you've escaped it, you've evaded that. And what I had skipped in that first manuscript was that pain of being, of all the moments, I suppose, that you read with Peta, and I didn't realise that I had an own voice to write from until, for other events. And then when I sat down and started writing, Peta just, after I sat her on that cold concrete wall, everything else just flowed out. And all I needed was the confidence to use that voice behind her for her character to arrive, and it just kind of went out.
Fantastic. There's also a question here from Kelly, who wants to know if you wrote this book for neurodiverse readers, and what are you hoping that neurodiverse readers will get out of? Neurotypical readers will get out of the book, or neurodiverse readers, I think.
I didn't think about the readers at all. I'm really sorry. I probably will from here on because hi. But at the time, it didn't occur to me. I just thought I was just writing as I think, and I didn't really think about that. I did probably in the editing process go back and make sure we were very clear about certain metaphors that could be taken wrongly, that they were written really carefully. And there's a lot of Frankenstein in the novel, so we had to be really careful what was drawn from that, and it ended in the way we wanted it to. So we were careful retrospectively that things weren't happening accidentally to mislead or to misidentify in any way. Does that answer that?
Yeah. And we've also got a question from Cherie. Or Cherry? I'm not sure.
Sherry, that'll be Sherry.
Excellent. Love the references to Frankenstein's monster running through the book, and would like to hear how you arrived at that particular metaphor.
That's it. So the way it starts is her obsession with, they're doing Frankenstein at school, and Sherry knows about my obsession with Frankenstein. We did our PhDs together, and she just loves this idea that we're all monsters together. We're all learning together how to be human, just as the monster does in the novel. But by the end, we tore and ripped at every heartstring we had to understand how that idea comes about. And I can't tell you because you've got to get there, but damn, it's worth it. Oh, I get to use the word sloths.
Oh, nice.
Sloths. And the excuse to use that word in your novel is worth reading.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's hard to explain how that ends up without big spoilers, but it's just was for me, that who has a definite obsession with words, a little obsession with Frankenstein there. It was such a joy to do that. Yeah.
I'm glad she asked that question because that was one of the ones I didn't get to. So thank you.
We've got a comment here, which is nice, which is when I first read the book as a neurodivergent person, after the chapter, it was so clear to me that you were neurodivergent, and people can't describe autism in the way you do. So thank you for bringing another neurodiverse voice story into the world. So that's a really lovely comment, that one.
Thank you.
So that's really great. And there's a question here. Just scroll back to it, which is, are you optimistic that the support, education, awareness available today will allow neurodivergent children to live more easily than when you were young? Good question.
Yes. Was that convincing? Yeah,
Oh,
we're getting there. I've taught teachers for a long time. We didn't teach so much about neurodivergent people. If I ever got back to teaching, there'd be a lot more and a lot more confidently in there too, because you need to teach the teachers before you expect them to go into schools and do certain things. And we're putting a hell of a lot on teachers at the moment. Very specifically, as well as right now. I think the general understanding is good, and I think it will probably get worse before it gets better. And I think that's probably what we're going through now, is this, we all understand. It's okay. It's all Sheldon, and, they'll be right, and we'll just all do that. And that's how we'll understand it. And I think this surface understanding is probably dangerous, and that will happen for a while. And then a deeper understanding will come after it. So we just need to accept a little bit of a rebound action from nothing to that, and then some real change will come about. And that's why I did write in there's a character from a school who's really important to Peter, who's very wonderful, and who's very directly based on someone I know who's an amazing special education teacher.
Robert here has a question, which is, have you discovered a wider community of neurodiverse writers through writing and promoting this book?
Well, yes, I knew nobody. I don't think I was even on Twitter until I started writing at all, which people will find hard to believe, given that I probably...
Did Twitter even exist before you were on it, Anna? I don't think Twitter was a thing.
Kind of live there now. And I'd never met another adult with ADHD, like diagnosed and recognised, I think, before I went on Twitter. And then to meet someone with ADHD who is also autistic, and then to meet someone with ADHD who is autistic and identifies as queer or has sensory processing disorder, all these things that you just think wouldn't occur in one human, because that's a bit of label overload. There are loads of us. We're taking over. So yeah, and the writers, I mean, I've Kay Kerr, who's been so close with me for this journey with Please Don't Hug Me. That's my second copy, so we're all clear. The other one's by my bed. And to have 2 young adult novels coming out with Own Voices autistic writers is just phenomenal. So I'm very, very lucky.
Lou has asked, how efficient are you as a writer? How much did you write that didn't go in the novel?
Not much.
That's great.
I write pretty much beginning to end, and then it was a bit short, and so I went back and put some other bits in, the flashbacks, to get it up to the word limit. For Peta Lyre, now for other novels that's very different. I have more, and it's more messy. The whole process since then has been very messy and taken a very long time. But I think Peta Lyre just was that one that had to happen this way, which was, it just went in like that. And I don't know if I'll ever experience that again. Writing still happens in the same fashion, in a very quick fashion, in that nearly all of it will go in unless I've stuffed up the plot or something, because I've tried something new and different. And so that's when, if you're pushing the boundaries, which you always want to do, well, you're going to get bored. So pushing the boundaries, you're more likely to make a mistake. But with Peter, I had just the one character to worry about. So it was a little bit, that's more straightforward in that way.
Look, we are going to be running out of time, so I just thought I'd throw back to you, Cass, just for any final comments before we open the room up so people can be unmuted and clap.
Yeah, thanks, Chrissy. I just wanted to give a huge thanks to Anna and also to Kate tonight, but particularly Anna for speaking so candidly to us about her own experiences, and for writing this book that gives others the opportunity to walk in somebody else's shoes. If you're neurodiverse, if you're the parent or the friend of someone who is, I urge you to buy multiple copies of this book and share them with everyone. I think we would give Anna tonight a rating 10 out of 10. And finally, I guess I was thinking today that we hear a lot at the moment about herd immunity, but I think that this novel encourages herd empathy in a really relatable way. So congratulations, Anna.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Danielle Binks, who's down there holding my book very beautifully. And she's the reason Kay and I are both published this year. Thank you, Danielle, for believing in us.
And I'm going to, thanks, Anna, thanks, Cass, and thanks, Kate. And I'm going to open the room up now. So you're all going to be unmuted. So if you're, busy yelling at your child, maybe just for a minute, just clap instead. So I'm just unmuting everybody for a last clap. You're all unmuted, and then I will go.
Hey, well done, Anna. Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Diana. Done.
Oh my God, you're all flicking in and out. This is so sensory overload.
Amazing. One more time.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And now you're all flicking in.
You can see everybody.
Oh, it's Elise. Everybody's here. Oh, this is hilarious. My face hurts so bad right now.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well done.
Good job. Beautiful.